After Nigeria's second military coup of July 1966, we saw the deaths of his first military president and that of over 200 officers from the eastern region. The future of the country after 6 years of independence was anything but promising. To make matters worse, in the months following the coup, a series of pogroms arose in the northern region that led to the deaths of over 30,000 Easterners, particularly of the Igbo ethnicity. Soon, many of the surviving Easterners began to return to the east with horrific tales of what they had witnessed in the north. Exactly how many refugees poured into the eastern region between mid-September and 31st of December 1966 will never be precisely known. Many have estimated it to be between 1 and 2 million people from the north and half of that from the other two regions. The new military ruler, Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon, made several promises to put a stop to the killings in the north. But even after delivering a series of broadcasts intended to put an end to the killings, it continued. Gowon also made plans for all military governors in Nigeria under the framework of the Supreme Military Council to meet and sort out ways of distilling the crisis in the country. But Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu, the military governor of the eastern region, who refused to recognize Gowon's leadership, refused to attend any meeting within Nigeria for safety reasons. Finally, on the 4th and 5th of January 1967, General Akran of Ghana agreed to host the officers on his territory at Aburi. A lot was discussed and agreed upon during the meeting at Aburi, but the fulcrum of the agreement was that each region would be responsible for its affairs and that the federal military government would only be responsible for matters that affected the entire country. At the end of the meeting, Ojukwu and Gowon shook hands and promised to abide by what they had agreed. But on the 26th of January 1967, Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon gave a press conference rejecting the main points agreed upon at Aburi. Ojukwu immediately responded by issuing an edict that all federal revenues collected in the east, excluding oil, would thereafter be diverted internally to deal with the problems of the displaced people in the eastern region. The mere mention of oil revenues sent shivers down the collective spine of the Supreme Military Council. You see, most of Nigeria's oil is located in the minority non-Igbo region of the east. Gowon responded almost immediately by issuing Decree No. 8, which gave him absolute power over the affairs of any regional government in the country. Ojukwu promptly rejects this decree and begins plans for the secession of the eastern region from the Republic of Nigeria. To prevent the East from seceding, Gowon divided the 4 regions of the country into 12 states. He cleverly divided the eastern region into 3 states, separating the core Igbo territory from the minority regions where most of the oil in the country was located. In early May, Gowon imposed a blockade in the eastern region, and this was the final straw. On the 30th of May 1967, Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu declared the independence of the eastern region and he renamed it the Independent Republic of Biafra. In the months that followed, a sense of calm before the storm descended on the new nation. The population of Biafra held its breath in anticipation.
Do you think that it will be necessary to use military force to bring down Colonel Ojukwu's regime?
Yes, it is necessary. I think I have made this point before that if the integrity, corporate existence of this country is threatened, I will use force to maintain it.
If civil war comes, and I do think it is imminent, you're quite right. It will for us be the price of freedom. Our people here have for a long time been prepared for this eventuality, and I am confident of their readiness. I think that when it does come, that the people on the other side would be surprised as to what they're going to get. And I'm confident that it will not last long.
On the 6th of July 1967, Nigerian artillery shells began to rain down on the town of Ogoja, 10 miles from the border with the north. The Nigerian Military High Command launched an open assault on the breakaway region of Biafra in what was initially described as a police action.
Okay, everybody on your feet up! Let's go! The mortar, come on! I'm a baby!
The 1st Division of the Federal Army, commanded by Colonel Mohammed Shoa, the former commanding officer of the 5th Battalion in Kano, led a series of attacks on the Biafran northern border towns of Obudu, Ogoja, Garkem, and Nsukka. This assault was codenamed Operation Unicorn. The strategy was to facilitate a quick capture of Enugu, the Biafran capital, which they confidently predicted would be achieved in a matter of weeks, if not days, thereby bringing an end to the action. The division consisted of 2 brigades comprising 3 battalions each. The 1st Brigade, commanded by Major Sule Apollo, the man who led the first assault on Biafra, was tasked with the capture of the towns of Ogugu and Nsukka, the latter being an important commercial center in Biafra. From there, the detached elements will be earmarked to push south and probe the perimeter defense of Enugu, about 35 miles further south.
It seemed clear that their attitude was originally to make a massive assault on the Nsukka area, the Ogoja area, so as to tie up all our troops, and then to make an armored thrust through Nsukka direct to their number 1 objective, Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu in Enugu. If you didn't know it, that's me.
The 2nd Brigade, commanded by Major Martin Adamu, was tasked with bearing down on Enugu from the east, capturing the towns of Ogoja, Obudu, and Garkem in the process. The offensive was premised on a fairly simple plan that relied heavily on communication and coordination, and was based primarily on the expectation of minimal defense from the Biafran army. Indeed, the initial Biafran response to the offensive was minimal, as its elements were poorly assembled and commanded. At the outset of the war, the Biafran army had a strength of between 5,000 and 7,000 men, with only a tiny minority armed with modern weapons. Although several officers had joined the Biafran army from the Federal Army, there were only a few of them in comparison with their Nigerian counterparts. Ojukwu took it upon himself to release all officers who took part in the first military coup from prisons stationed in the eastern region. This included Major Skanduna Nzegu, Emmanuel Ifejuna, Timothy Onwatuegu, Humphrey Chukwuka, and Lieutenant Colonel Victor Banjo, who was also imprisoned by Agwe Ronsi because of an assassination attempt. In the first few days of the conflict, the defensive Biafran army, made up of significant numbers of volunteers that were poorly armed, soon found themselves vulnerable to heavy artillery bombardment from the Nigerian forces. Finding themselves hopeless in the face of blanket artillery and mortar fire support, the defending Biafran troops from the 7th Battalion had no choice but to withdraw. On the 29th of July 1967, Major Chukwuma Kaduna Nzegu, the leader of Nigeria's first military coup, who had now been promoted to the rank of a Biafran lieutenant colonel, was trapped in an ambush and killed near Nsukka while conducting a 9th reconnaissance operation against the federal troops of the 21st Battalion under Captain Inuwa Bushishi. Even though Nzegu was technically an enemy soldier killed in combat, Gowon ordered his body to be flown to Kaduna and buried with full military honors. By the end of July, the towns of Ogoja, Obudu, Garkem, and Nsukka was successfully occupied by the 1st and the 2nd Brigades of the Federal Army. The Biafran capital of Enugu was now in sight. On the 25th of July 1967, the Nigerian 3rd Marine Commando Division, commanded by Colonel Benjamin Adenkule, the Black Scorpion, launched a surprise seaborne assault on the island of Bonny, east of the Niger Delta region. The island was at the time an extremely important location as it was the main oil loading terminal for the Shell BP pipeline from Port Harcourt. The plan for the capture of Bonny was to conquer the waterways and deny the Biafrans from receiving logistics during the war. With the Nigerian victories in the north, the seaborne attack in the south, and the Biafran capital of Enugu coming under immense pressure from the 1st Division, Ojukwu revealed a streak of tactical flair at the last minute. He called it Operation Torch. Operation Torch was conceived by the Biafran High Command as a means to exploit the fact that the Supreme Military Council had rather unwisely respected the wishes of the Midwestern region to remain neutral in the conflict. And so, they concentrated their efforts on attacking Biafra from the north and the south, leaving the Midwest widely open. Ojukwu began to draw up plans for an invasion of the Midwest in an attempt to divert attention away from Enugu and possibly bring a quick end to the war. On the 8th of August 1967, Biafran troops from the newly formed 101st Division, commanded by Colonel Victor Banjo and assisted by Lieutenant Colonel Emmanuel Ifeojina, crossed the Niger at Onitsha and landed in the midwestern city of Asaba. Within minutes, they took control of the post office and disconnected all major communication lines in the city. They continued to press forward, and when they reached the town of Agbo, they split into 3 fronts. The 12th Battalion, under Colonel Festus Akanga, moved west towards Benin City, the capital of the Midwest, and captured it. The 18th Battalion, under Major Ofri Chukwuka, moved southwards towards the towns of Warri, Sapele, and Ugeli, which were some of the oil-rich areas in the region. The last front, which was the 13th Battalion, under Colonel Mike Invensu, swung northwards towards the towns of Auchi and Agenebode. Unbeknownst to Colonel Banjo, some soldiers under a Midwesterner called Lieutenant Colonel Ochai made their way to the residence of Lieutenant Colonel David Ejo, the military governor of the Midwest. They were ordered by Ojukwu to arrest him. Fortunately for Ejo, his quartermaster, Lieutenant Colonel Samuel Ogbemudia, changed the guard detail at the government house the night prior, effectively replacing the troops that were ordered to hand over the governor of the Midwest. These new guards resisted the attacking soldiers and gave Ejo enough time to escape. The 12th Battalion, now transformed into a brigade, was tasked with a quick capture of Ibadan and the Nigerian capital city of Lagos. But this was postponed for about 3 days because Ojukwu and Banjo argued over whom to appoint as governor of the Midwestern region. Not wanting to appoint an Igbo officer as governor in the region, Banjo suggested that either Lieutenant Colonel Samuel Ogbemudia or Colonel Rudolph Trimley be given the post. But Ojukwu refused and ultimately settled for an Igbo medical officer by the name of Major Albert Okonkwo. Returning to Benin, Banjo resumed the extremely delayed advance of the 12th Brigade to Lagos and Ibadan. They made their way to the town of Hore and awaited further instructions. In Warri, soldiers led by Major Ofri Chukwuka made their way to the Warri prison and released Major Ademoyega, another co-conspirator of the January coup. Major Ademoyega was put in command of a newly formed Biafran 19th Battalion comprising 700 recently recruited soldiers meant to support the 12th Brigade in Benin. Lieutenant Colonel Ifeojina later gave up his command to Colonel Henry Igbugba and returned to Enugu as the division's liaison officer. After being appointed governor of the Midwest on August the 17th, Okonkwo installed a dusk-to-dawn curfew, allowing only citizens with passes to move freely at night. The administration was structured to empower those who supported the invasion. Local governments in the area were directed to donate materials to Enugu to support the war efforts. The opinions of the Midwesterners towards the Igbos before the invasion was indifferent, if not negative. Soon, some resistance groups began to spring up against the Biafrans, particularly from the ethnic Urhobos and Ijaws in the region. On the 20th of August 1967, a group of these rebels successfully raided the Biafran camp, killing 50 soldiers in the process. In retaliation, the Biafran soldiers began raiding many villages in the Midwest, carrying out many atrocities in the process. On the 19th of September 1967, Ojukwu created the Biafran puppet state out of the Midwest with Okonkwo as its president and called it the Republic of Benin. This only lasted for 24 hours. With this, Gowon immediately removed the clause for the police action and declared an all-out war on Biafra. On the 20th of September 1967, while the Biafran 12th Brigade was stationed in Ore, a newly formed Nigerian 2nd Division, commanded by Colonel Murtala Mohammed, attacked the Biafrans and forced them to retreat. The retreating Biafrans managed to get a vital head start in front of the advancing Nigerians by destroying some bridges on their way to Benin. When the Nigerian 2nd Division reached Benin, they discovered that the city was largely abandoned, but they managed to find a trapped Biafran unit stationed in the Benin prison. Most of them were killed by the federal forces while attempting to escape, the predominant of which was Colonel Henry Igboba, who was imprisoned in Benin City by Banjo and beheaded by the federal forces when they arrived. Meanwhile, the Nigerian 3rd Marine Commando Division under Colonel Benjamin Adenkule was ordered to halt their advance from the Biafran south and head west towards Warri. They succeeded in retaking Warri, Sapele and Ugeli from the Biafrans. Continuing their retreat from the Midwest, the Biafran troops from the 101st Division arrived at Asaba and crossed the Niger into Onitsha. To delay the 2nd Division from advancing into the Biafran territory, they destroyed the Niger Bridge at Onitsha. Arriving at Onitsha, Ojukwu summoned Colonel Victor Banjo and 3 other officers including Lieutenant Colonel Ifejuna to Enugu. They were accused of negotiating with the federal officials through British agents hoping to bring about a ceasefire and overthrow Ojukwu. They were hastily tried and sentenced to death by a firing squad for treason. On the 22nd of September 1967, Colonels Victor Banjo, Philip Alale, Sam Agbam, and Lieutenant Colonel Ifejuna were executed. Suffice to say, Lieutenant Colonel Ifejuna was the first black African to win a gold medal at an international sporting event. He claimed the medal during the men's high jump at the 1954 Commonwealth Games in Vancouver, Canada. Many regard Nzegu as the leader of Nigeria's first military coup, which is quite right, but the true brain behind the coup was no other person but Emmanuel Ifejuna. Whilst Nzegu has been decorated as a war hero and has a statue of him erected in his hometown, Ifejuna has continued to receive little or no recognition after his death. The Nigerian 1st Division began their advance from Nsukka to Enugu on the 12th of September 1967. Armed mostly with small arms and some anti-tank weapons, the troops kept in close contact with each other to keep the line of advance even. The Biafran 53rd Brigade under Colonel Alexander Madiebo, the newly appointed head of the Biafran army, was tasked with defending Enugu. But his unit had been exhausted by previous engagements and was unable to call up reinforcements. The Biafran forces attempted to slow down the federal troops, but within a few weeks, the Nigerian forces reached the heart of Enugu. Federal artillery began bombarding Enugu on the 26th of September, conducting multiple air raids in the process. News of the 2nd Division's success in the Midwest and Ojukwu's decision to execute some of his top officers boosted their morale. On the 1st of October 1967, Ojukwu delivered a speech over the radio pledging Biafrans not to abandon Enugu. But 2 days later, as the bombardment became intense, the Biafrans began to evacuate. Meanwhile, Gowon ordered Major T.Y. Danjuma to assume the temporary rank of Lieutenant Colonel and replace Major Sule Apollo as the commander of the 1st Brigade. Danjuma was given charge of 6 full battalions and 2,000 troops as reinforcements, which he organized into 1 additional battalion, with the remaining 1,000 troops held in reserve. Having obtained some armored cars, he linked up his forces before moving ahead on a narrower front towards Enugu. Finally, on the 4th of October 1967, Federal Air and Ground Forces assaulted the city. Ojukwu was asleep in the Biafran State House when the federal troops attacked. he awoke to the sound of gunfire and mortar explosion and found the building surrounded by the federal forces. But disguising himself as a servant, he walked past the circle of soldiers and escaped. In the end, the Nigerian 1st Division successfully occupied the city. Troops from the 1st Division were some of the most experienced soldiers in the Nigerian army, as many of them had fought during the Second World War. Nigerians hoped that Enugu's capture would convince the Igbos to end their support for the secession, but this did not occur. The next day, Ojukwu relocated his government without much difficulty to Umuahia, a city positioned deep within the Igbo territory. On the 5th of October 1967, federal troops from the 2nd Division entered the midwestern city of Asaba. They immediately began to ransack houses and killing civilians, claiming that they were sympathizing with the Biafrans. In an attempt to stop the violence, the leaders of Asaba summoned all the townspeople to a peaceful march pledging loyalty to Nigeria. On the morning of October the 7th, thousands of men, women and children from every corner of Asaba joined the parade, singing, dancing and shouting words of "One Nigeria, One Nigeria." Some Nigerian soldiers were with them. Suddenly, these soldiers, ordered by Major Ibrahim Taiwo, separated the men and teenage boys from their wives, daughters, mothers, and sisters. They gathered the men and young boys in an open square and opened fire at them. Exactly how many died that day is not clear. Some sources estimated it to be over 700 men. For many months, federal troops from the 2nd Division occupied Asaba, and they continued to carry out many atrocities, destroying the town in the process. In late October 1967, troops from the Federal 2nd Division began to prepare for an invasion of the Biafran city of Onitsha. The defense of the city fell in the hands of the Biafran's 11th Division under Colonel Conrad Nwanwo. It was split into 3 battalions, the 11th, the 12th, and the 18th. The 12th Battalion, under Colonel Mike Ivensu, was responsible for defending the areas between Ida and Usube. Colonel Asa Musudo led the 18th Battalion. They were responsible for defending the main town of Onitsha. The 11th Battalion, under the Anibal of Biafra, Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Achuze, was tasked with defending the areas between Atani and Ndoni. Because the Biafrans had detonated the Niger Bridge, Gowon ordered Colonel Murtala Mohammed to cross the Niger at Ida, but he disregarded the advice and instead led an amphibious assault on Onitsha. On the 4th of October 1967, Colonel Murtala Mohammed ordered the Nigerian artillery to begin bombarding Onitsha. Eight days later, he led a 10-boat armada carrying 5,000 Nigerian soldiers across the Niger River into Onitsha. The Biafran 18th Battalion resisted stubbornly to the assault but was later forced to retreat in disarray. However, instead of pursuing the retreating Biafrans and occupying the town, the Nigerians turned their attention to looting and burning the Onitsha market to the ground. This gave the 18th Battalion enough time to reorganize and make a counterattack. Major Achuze's 11th Battalion made their way up to the New Market Road, while the 18th Battalion, under Colonel Usudo, swung down the Old Market Road towards Onitsha. Soon, the troops from the 2nd Division, stationed in Onitsha, were cornered by the Biafrans and attacked. There were many casualties on the Nigerian side, and only a few of them were able to retreat. Undoubted, Murtala Mohammed ordered 5,000 troops reserved from Lagos to cross the Niger River into Onitsha, but they were once again defeated. Again for the 3rd time, Colonel Murtala Mohammed ordered troops under Lieutenant Colonel Alani Akirinade to make a 3rd assault on Onitsha, but they were once again thwarted by the Biafran 11th and 18th Battalions. Finally, after losing a lot of his men, the commander of the 2nd Division now realized that there was no hope in attacking Onitsha from Asaba and began to head northwards towards Ida. Colonel Murtala Mohammed's conduct on the operations to cross the Niger River has about every element of gross military misconduct. yet no words of criticism has ever been officially uttered. Lieutenant Colonel Alani Akirilade would later leave the 2nd Division and become the commander of the 15th Brigade over at the 3rd Marine Commando Division. On the 7th of October 1967, the Nigerian 3rd Marine Commando Division, under the command of Colonel Benjamin Adenkule, the Black Scorpion, disembarked from Warri for the port of Bonny. The Nigerians now planned to use Bonny as a launch pad for invading the city of Calabar, which housed one of the largest seaports in Biafra. Operation Tiger Claw was the code name for the military operation. The city of Calabar was defended by the Biafran 9th Battalion under the command of Major Ogbu Oji, who was also responsible for the defense of Biafra's entire southeast coastline from Opobo to the Cameroon border. On October the 17th, Biafran defenses on the beaches of Calabar came under heavy aerial and naval bombardment. The small but stubborn Biafran resistance was overwhelmed but managed to retain control over certain parts of Calabar and its surrounding areas. Bloody hand-to-hand fighting ensued after Nigerian troops began to enter Calabar from 3 different positions. As a result, Major Oji was seriously wounded during the fighting and had to be evacuated to Umuahia, while his outnumbered troops retreated to new defensive positions on the outskirts of Calabar. He was later replaced by Lieutenant Colonel David Okafor. Okafor decided to wait for reinforcement before embarking on the counterattack. He was soon joined by the Biafran 7th Battalion under the command of Colonel Festus Akanga. Upon arrival, the Biafran 7th Battalion came under serious attack from the Nigerians. Colonel Akanga relayed the message to Ojukwu, stating that the situation in Calabar was hopeless and that they were in desperate need of assistance. Commander for GOC, the situation in this sector is definitely out of hands, if not hopeless. Not a single round of ammunition is held while enemy pressures continue ceaselessly for the past 48 hours. We intend to stay on and make the supreme sacrifice. Please help before it is too late. We who are about to die salute you. In the face of imminent devastation, Ojukwu sent some newly recruited white mercenaries led by a French colonel by the name of Roger Frick. But upon arrival, they also came under immediate attack from the Nigerians. After suffering unusually high casualties, the Biafrans, along with their white mercenaries, retreated to the north. Afterward, Roger Frick and some of his men left Biafra and never returned. And so, Calabar had been successfully captured by the Nigerians. The fall of the port city now blocked Biafran's access to the neighboring Cameroon. In December 1967, Colonel Murtala's 2nd Division, along with the Nigerian 6th Battalion under Lieutenant Colonel Shehu Musa Yaradua, crossed the River Niger at Ida in a substantial convoy comprising multiple troop carriers, armored personnel carriers, armored cars, fuel tankers, and along with an estimated 14,000 men. In early January 1968, Colonel Murtala Mohammed led a 2-pronged attack on the axis of Udi and Adani. 40 miles south of Nsukka, the town of Udi was taken relatively easily by the Nigerians. But from there, the division ran into the Biafran's 53rd Brigade under Colonel Christian Ude. At Adani, Murtala's troops attacked Colonel Mike Invensu's Biafran 12th Division. Colonel Murtala Mohammed, again displaying an astonishing lack of tactical originality, punched forward with his forces moving in close formations. He sustained astronomical losses from the Biafrans, who continued to harass them from the flanks and rear of the formation. However, the sheer weight of the 2nd Infantry Division drove forward and eventually succeeded in capturing the town of Oka, 35 miles east of Onitsha, on the 19th of January 1968. Oka was also the hometown of the Biafran Army Commander Major General Alexander Madiebo. With the road to Onitsha now open to the Nigerian 2nd Division, Ojukwu replaced Colonel Conrad Wanwo, the commander of the 11th Division, with Lieutenant Colonel Joe Achuzie and placed him in charge of the primary defense of the town. Anytime Murtala's troops attacked, Achuzie's troops counter-attacked, and with this strategy, Lieutenant Colonel Achuzie managed to hold off the Nigerian troops 22 kilometers outside of Onitsha for more than 2 months. But the Biafrans right from the beginning lacked the firepower and armored cars at Murtala's disposal. On the 20th of March 1968, troops from the Nigerian 2nd Division marched through Abagana and finally reached Onitsha. The final battle of Onitsha will last 24 hours. The Nigerians were forced to pay with heavy casualties, but they managed to capture Onitsha on the 26th of March 1968, indicating that the victory in the Nigerian Civil War was to be determined not by willpower but by firepower. Defeated at Onitsha, the Biafrans 11th Division broke into 2 units. The first, under Colonel Conrad Nwanwo, retreated to the south to Unewi. The other, under Lieutenant Colonel Joe Achuzie, marched to the Enugu-Onitsha road where they laid a critical ambush. Due to the speed with which Colonel Murtala's troops raced into Onitsha, he often left some of his supplies behind. On the 31st of March 1968, a convoy consisting of 102 vehicles transporting 6,000 soldiers was on its way to Onitsha to deliver all those supplies. At Abagana, 6 miles from Onitsha, the convoy was ambushed by a small unit of Achuzie's 11th Division led by Major Jonathan Uchendu. Seeing the convoy, troops from Uchendu's unit became anxious and wanted to fire, but they were ordered to remain calm and allow most of the convoy to pass through them. As Major Uchendu was giving instructions to a soldier with a rocket launcher, the soldier accidentally pulled the trigger. The rocket went straight to a gasoline tanker in front of the convoy and ignited an explosion that engulfs the entire fleet. Many troops from the Nigerian 2nd Division are charred. The surviving Nigerian soldiers, who had already crossed over into the Biafran line, panicked and ran in different directions in total confusion. Most of them were attacked and killed by the Biafran soldiers. The ambush at Abagana was the greatest ambush throughout the Civil War. The Nigerian army suffered a single heaviest loss that day. The result of the ambush provided a much needed boost to the Biafran morale, but in real terms, it did very little to order the gradual reduction of Biafra into a diminishing enclave. Colonel Murtala Muhammad's 2nd Division suffered a lot of casualties throughout the war. He had entered Biafra with over 20,000 men, and out of which only a little over 2,000 men finally reached Onitsha. When he got to Lagos to report the results of this rather tarnished victory, he was relieved of his operational command. He never commanded any division again. The international political opinion varied very little throughout the war. The major international powers remained generally sympathetic but steadfast in their refusal to recognize Biafra. This movement was led primarily by Britain under Prime Minister Harold Wilson. Britain claimed that its support for Nigeria was in the interest of the country's economy, but a closer look at the map of Biafra indicates otherwise. You see, the bulk of the Nigerian foreign exchange was derived from oil, with its major installations located in the east, and the likes of Shell and British Petroleum, then partly owned by the British government, was the largest producer of oil in the country. The war reminded the British of their biggest investments in the country, which was the Nigerian oil, and so the former colonial masters ended up providing the bulk of the necessary war materials to the federal side. However, the British were reluctant to conclude any deals on aircraft, fearing an escalation of the war if modern fighter jets and bombers were introduced to the conflict. This offered the Soviet Union the opportunity to tender its assistance. The Soviets supplied the Nigerians with a lot of aircraft, but under the condition that they should only be flown by Egyptian pilots. In August 1967, President Gamal Nasser of Egypt sent some troops of the Egyptian Air Force to fight for Nigeria. The tendency of the Egyptian pilots to indiscriminately bomb the Biafran civilians proved counterproductive in the propaganda war, as the Biafrans did their best to publicize cases of civilians killed by the Egyptians. However, in the spring of 1969, the Nigerians replaced the Egyptian pilots with pilots from East Germany, who proved to be considerably more competent. The United States foreign policy on the matter tended to follow the British in terms of withholding recognition and support for Biafra. But no organization influenced the international response more than the Organization of African Union. The official position of the OAU tended to be determined by the collective attitude of majority of 2/3 of its members, all of whom maintained that the Nigerian Civil War was an internal affair. With this, a general reluctance to accept the breakaway region of Biafra ensued amongst most African countries. They felt that supporting any secessionist tendency would send the wrong message to the minority groups in other states in Africa, where the maintenance of colonial boundaries was extremely tenuous. Only the Ivory Coast, Zambia, Tanzania, Gabon, and the Caribbean state of Haiti formally recognized Biafra as a country. Although France did not officially recognize the sovereignty of Biafra, it provided weapons and mercenary fighters and other assistance to Biafra.
Chrétiens, en général, vivent dans le sud d'une certaine façon, qui ont une langue à eux. Pourquoi les Ibos dépendraient-ils d'une autre fraction ethnique de la fédération, car c'est à ça qu'on en arrive. La France, dans cette affaire, aide le Biafra dans la mesure des possibilités.
The French president, Charles de Gaulle, referred to the situation in Biafra as a just and noble cause. But as with all things relating to war, economics will surely have a role to play. The French oil company, Safrap, laid claim to 7% of Nigeria's petroleum supply, and since the majority of the country's oil reserve lie in Biafra, they felt that supporting the secession might place them in a comfortable position if it ended up becoming a reality. Biafra, for its part, openly appreciated its relationship with the French. On the 10th of August 1967, Ojukwu made French the compulsory subject in secondary, technical, and teacher training schools across Biafra.
We shall never go back to Nigeria again. God's grace will surely emerge as a nation. And so, as far as this war continues, we'll fight to the last man.
Following the defeat in Calabar, the Biafrans regrouped the remnants of their troops and created the Biafran 12th Division under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Festus Akanga. He divided the division into two brigades: the 56th Brigade under Colonel Simon Uwakwe and the 58th Brigade commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Ifeanyi Aniebo. In early March, the beaches at Oro came under heavy Nigerian aerial and naval bombardments. On the 8th of March 1968, the Nigerian 33rd Battalion under Major Ted Aman overran the Biafran defensive positions and continued towards Uyo. Confused by the swiftness of the Nigerian advance, Lieutenant Colonel Ifeanyi Aniebo loses control of his troops. Meanwhile, the Nigerian 16th and 17th Brigades stormed through the towns of Eket and Opobo and immediately captured them. They were both commanded by Colonels E.A. Etuk and Philemon Shande, respectively. Consequently, hundreds of Biafran troops were cut off and forced to surrender after the Nigerian troops stationed at Oro linked up with the Nigerian 16th and 17th Brigade in Uyo. With the Biafrans in retreat, the Nigerian 15th Brigade based in Bonny, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Alani Akirinade, launched an attack on the city of Port Harcourt. At the time, Port Harcourt was defended by the Biafran 52nd Brigade under Colonel Ogbogu Kalu. After heavy fighting, the Nigerian troops captured the town of One, but their success was short-lived. A division of Biafran soldiers under an Italian-born mercenary by the name of Giorgio Nobbiato unexpectedly counterattacked, inflicting heavy casualties and forcing the Nigerians to retreat from One. But the Italian is subsequently killed during a battle with the Nigerian 17th Brigade under Colonel Philemon Shande. The Nigerian 17th Brigade followed up its success by capturing the town of Afam, whose power station provided much of Biafran's electricity. As a result, most of Biafra experienced a blackout. As the Biafran lines around Port Harcourt continue to crumble, a message is sent over Radio Biafra for the defense of the city.
The one Port Harcourt. We want our oil wealth by all means and at all costs, but we cannot get it. Port Harcourt signifies our freedom, our faith in God, and our unflinching determination to survive.
By early May, Ojukwu replaced Colonel Ogbogu with a competent Biafran commander, Lieutenant Colonel Joe Achuzie, and placed him in charge of defending the city. Achuzie's arrival intensified the Biafrans, but soon Port Harcourt came under heavy Nigerian artillery bombardment and the Biafran troops fiercely resisted. During 5 days of heavy fighting, Port Harcourt's airport and army barracks changed hands on numerous occasions, but by the 19th of May, most Biafran troops had pushed out of the city into the surrounding areas. It was here, at the Battle of Okrika, that the foremost minority rights activist and leader of one of the earliest armed militias of southern Nigeria, Major Isaac Adakaboro, was killed. He was recruited into the Nigerian army to fight against his own people. Undeterred by the Nigerian advancement, Achuzie continued to fight against the troops from the 17th and 14th Brigades. He narrowly escaped death after almost being run down by an armored car. In the end, his troops abandoned the fighting and retreated to the town of Igrita, north of Port Harcourt. And so, the city of Port Harcourt was captured by the Nigerians, cutting off Biafran's main access to the sea. The issue of starvation as a tactic of war, both directly by the federal government and as a tool of propaganda applied by the Biafran government, was one of the most controversial issues of the entire war. As the number of Biafran cities captured by the Nigerians increased, the sheer number of internally displaced civilians skyrocketed. And since Biafra was now blockaded and completely encircled by the Nigerians, most of these civilians, particularly children, began to die of malnutrition and starvation. By July 1968, over 3,000 children were estimated to be dying daily. In August, that number rose to 6,000. The Nigerian Civil War was one of the first wars in Africa to be fought under the scrutiny of international television and press coverage. As a result, images of Biafran children looking like stick figures with bellies swollen from a protein deficiency known as kwashiorkor began to spread overseas. It was a terrible sight to behold. Although efforts were made by some foreign governments and aid to deal with the crisis, it often proved extremely difficult because of the resistance of both the federal and the Biafran government. The federal government insisted that all aid operations within Biafra be coordinated from Lagos and that the deliveries and shipments be routed through Nigeria. But the Biafrans would not agree to this, as they claimed that any food and aid shipments delivered through Nigeria would be laced with poison and therefore could not be trusted. They in turn often used the images and clips of the starving child for general propaganda purposes in an attempt to tip the diplomatic balance towards the recognition of key global powers. Although this strategy ultimately failed, it came reasonably close to succeeding on several occasions, particularly regarding the unofficial French recognition. Ojukwu felt that the use of starvation was a defended policy by the Nigerian government and a tactic of the Federal Armed Forces. This is what Chief Obafemi Awolowo, the Nigerian Minister of Finance, had to say concerning the issue. Everything is fair in war, and starvation is one of the weapons of war. I don't see why we should feed our enemies fat for them to fight harder. After the capture of Port Harcourt, Colonel Benjamin Adekunle, the Black Scorpion, and his 3rd Marine Commando Division began to make plans for the capture of the remaining major cities in Biafra. The 3 on his mind were the cities of Owerri, Aba, and the Biafran capital of Umuahia. And thus, the military action was codenamed Operation OAU. Adekunle's plan, arranged in a triangular configuration, was a simultaneous capture of the 3 cities. In August 1968, troops from the Nigerians 15th and 16th Brigade set up positions along the Aba-Umuahia road, cutting off all food shipments from the entire city. The strategy for gaining Aba was to surround and starve the city into submission. On the 2nd of September, Nigerian artillery began shelling the city while ground forces began to enter under heavy Biafran fire. The Biafran 14th Division came under heavy artillery bombardment from the Nigerian 16th Brigade under the command of Colonel E.A. Etuk. For 12 days, bloody house-to-house fighting ensued, and as a result, Colonel Philemon Chande, the commander of the Nigerian 17th Brigade, was killed in battle. After a lot of resistance, the Biafrans finally surrendered on the 4th of September 1968. The city of Aba had been successfully captured. Again, the Nigerian 15th and 16th Brigade were charged with the responsibility of capturing the town of Owerri. On the 13th of September 1968, Biafran's positions at the town of Awara came under fierce artillery bombardment. At the time, Owerri was defended by the Biafran's 14th Division. After putting up a lot of resistance, the Biafran's 14th Division finally abandoned the town of Owerri to the Nigerian 16th Brigade. After the capture of Owerri, Ojukwu appointed Colonel Ogbogu Kalu as commander of the Biafran's 14th Division and reminded him of his failures in Port Harcourt. Ojukwu commanded him to clear the enemies from Obinze, southwest of Owerri, in 24 hours or tender his resignation from the army. A few hours after the command, Colonel Ogbogu Kalu ordered the Biafran counterattack and was able to halt the Nigerian advance and partially occupy Obinze. Thereafter, Colonel Benjamin Adenkule's 3rd Marine Commando Division now turned his eyes towards the Biafran capital of Umuahia. On the 18th of September 1968, the 18th and 13th Brigade of the Nigerian 3rd Marine Commando Division began making their way towards Umuahia, but they were intercepted outside the city by a division of Biafran soldiers. For nearly 2 weeks, the two sides exchanged gunfire and artillery, resulting in mass casualties on both sides. Because of this, Colonel Adekunle radioed in that he needed reinforcement or his entire division would be at risk of annihilation, but they never arrived. The Biafrans at Umuahia put up a formidable resistance, resulting in the deaths of over 20,000 soldiers from the 3rd Marine Commando Division. This amounted to 2/3 of the entire division. On the 1st of October, the Nigerian 3rd Marine Commando Division had no other option but to retreat to Port Harcourt, leaving behind Colonel Etuk's 16th Brigade in Owerri. On the 15th of October 1968, troops led by the General Commanding Officer of the Biafran Army, Brigadier Alexander Madiebo, began to encircle Owerri. No further attempts were made by the Biafrans to recapture the city for 2 months. Since the beginning of the Civil War, there had been a conflict between the Biafran soldiers and the white mercenaries they hired. To discredit the mercenaries, the Biafran second-in-command, Major General Philip Effiong, managed to convince Ojukwu to order the 4th Commando Brigade to mount an offensive against the Nigerian position at Onitsha through open terrain. As a result, Ojukwu sent 4,000 troops from the 4th Commando Brigade to Nkwele, less than 10 kilometers outside Onitsha. This brigade was commanded by a no-nonsense German mercenary called Colonel Rolf Steiner. On the 15th of November 1968, Steiner was ordered to launch an offensive operation on Onitsha, coined Operation Hiroshima. The operation was a full frontal attack across an open field, and with no area support or any natural obstacles to hide behind, the attacking Biafran brigade was decimated by machine gun fire from the Nigerian 2nd Division led by Colonel Ibrahim Haruna. As a result, the Biafrans suffered heavy casualties. Undeterred by their losses, Major Taffy Williams, Steiner's second-in-command, ordered a unit of Biafran soldiers under a Belgian called Mark Goshen to attack a Nigerian defensive position. It was nothing but a suicide mission, and Goshen was immediately shot dead. Consequently, the Biafran 4th Commando Brigade lost more than half of its troops to the Nigerians. They were used as pawns in the battle of strength between their commanders. On the 29th of November 1968, the remaining soldiers of the 4th Commando Brigade retreated from Onitsha, leaving the city under complete Nigerian control for the rest of the war. The battle at Onitsha had a serious toll on Colonel Steiner, and they began drinking heavily to help relieve his panic attacks. On the 6th of December 1968, Ojukwu dismissed and deported him and 5 other mercenaries out of Biafra. Ojukwu then handed the command of the 4th Commando Brigade to Major Taffy Williams. In an effort to recapture the town of Owerri, the Biafran 60th Brigade, under the command of Colonel Ajum Asoya, began the main assault on the town on the 5th of December 1968. The assault lasted for 2 days, but the troops from the Nigerian 16th Brigade stayed in their original position despite suffering heavy casualties. On the 15th of March, the Biafran S Division, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Timothy Owantuegu, made the frontal assault on the 16th Brigade in Owerri, but it was forced to halt after suffering heavy casualties. He then placed half of his men under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Joe Achuze, and he was able to get within 1 kilometer of the city. Achuze then took control of the S Division for 1 week and continued the frontal assault on Owerri. But his plan ultimately failed and he retreated after suffering heavy casualties. On the 31st of March 1969, the Biafran 14th Division under Colonel Ugbogu Kalu finally attacked Owerri and secured control of over 70% of the city. Colonel Etuk's Nigerian 16th Brigade was getting constantly encircled by the Biafrans, cutting off their food and supplies in the process. The Nigerian 16th Brigade was continuously attacked by the Biafran 60th Brigade moving from the west, the 52nd Brigade from the north, and the 68th Battalion of the S Division from the east. This forced Colonel Etuk to order his troops to fight their way out of the town. On the 20th of April 1969, Etuk's second-in-command, Major Ted Arman, was shot and killed in Owerri by a Biafran sniper who had managed to get within firing range. He will be replaced by Captain Muhammadu Buhari. 4 days later, the remaining soldiers of the Nigerian 16th Brigade successfully retreated from Owerri and escaped into Nigerian held territory. This greatly overjoyed the inhabitants of the ever-decreasing enclave of Biafra. With the failed attempt of the 3rd Marine Commando Division to capture the city of Umuahia during Operation OAU, the general officer commanding the Nigerian 1st Division, Colonel Mohammed Shua, decided to give it a try. He codenamed his assault Operation Leopard and placed Lieutenant Colonel T.Y. Danjuma in charge of Sector 1 of the 1st Division, giving him control of the 4th, 21st, 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th, and 82nd Battalions. They were ordered with full force to move towards the Biafran capital. On the 27th of March 1969, in company of the Biafran 13th Division and the 55th Brigade were suddenly attacked with overwhelming force by the invading Nigerians. They managed to break through a gap of the Biafran defenses and bulldoze their way closer to the city. As a result of the swift Nigerian advance, the Biafrans began to ask for reinforcement. But before they arrived, the Nigerian 82nd Battalion under Major Ibrahim Babangida attacked and captured the town of Uzo Akoli, a few miles from Umuahia. During the fierce fighting that ensued, Major Babangida was seriously wounded and had to be replaced by his second-in-command, Major Malman Vasta, who led a counter-attack with armored cars and artillery. Reinforcement for the Biafrans came in the person of the competent Biafran commander Joe Achuzie, who was now promoted to a full colonel. Because Umuahia represented the embodiment of the life and death of Biafra, it was to be defended at all costs. It soon became the rendezvous location for most of the Biafrans' top military commanders. An attempt by the Nigerian 25th Battalion to snatch Umuahia led to the Biafran decimation of the entire battalion. On the 11th of April 1969, the Nigerian army called in for air support. From Uzuakoli to Umuakpo and Ameke to Umuahia, a veritable tornado of bombs and fire ravaged the Biafran control areas of the Umuahia sector. Consequently, Ojukwu replaced Lieutenant Colonel Timothy Onwatuegu with Colonel Azum Asoya as commander of the S Division. Using track tanks, the Nigerian 21st and 44th Battalions swung towards Umuahia through the forest, taking the Biafrans by surprise. Such was the surprise of the Nigerian attack that when Colonel Asoya began to check the reports of the Nigerian attack across the city, he found himself face to face with the advancing Nigerian army with no Biafran defenders. 48 hours later, on the 22nd of April 1969, the Nigerian army had total control of the capital city of Umuahia. The outcome of the war thus far created a sense of resentment from the Biafrans towards a collection of certain foreigners living in the region close to its borders. On the 7th of May 1969, a company of Biafran commando raided an Italian-owned oil installation near the town of Kwale in the Midwestern region. They heard that the oil workers were feeding the Nigerian forces with sensitive information. 11 workers, including 10 Italians and 1 Jordanian, were killed in the initial assault. A further 18 foreigners were taken as hostage. Among these were 14 Italians, 3 Germans, and 1 Lebanese. This operation, ill-conceived at the very least, was an absolute public relations disaster. Against the torrent of international protests, the oilfield workers were tried and found guilty of supporting the enemy. This incident caused an international uproar and temporarily weakened the European sympathy for Biafra. In the following month, both Pope Paul VI, the Italian government, the United Kingdom, and the United States mounted concerted pressure on Biafra. Over the fates of 18 white men, Europe and America is moved, but over the deaths of millions of Africans during the war, they remained indifferent. After receiving a personal direct mail from the Pope, Ojukwu pardoned the foreigners. The 18 men were released and flown out of Biafra in custody of diplomats from the Ivory Coast and Gabon.
Together with my colleagues in the Supreme Military Council and the Armed Forces, we have therefore resolved that we must now press on with all our might to defeat the rebels militarily and remove all traces of the tyranny and terror, the rebel regime, from the face of this country.
Over at the Federal Army Headquarters in Lagos, the Chief of Army Staff, Brigadier Hassan Katsina, and the Commander-in-Chief of the Nigerian Armed Forces were putting finishing touches on the plans for the final blow of the Biafran Rebellion. In May 1969, Gowon replaced the competent Colonel Mohammed Shua with Colonel Bisala as commander of the Nigerian 1st Division. Colonel Murtala Mohammed is replaced with Colonel Gibson Jallo as commander of the Nigerian 2nd Division. The commander of the Nigerian 3rd Marine Commando Division, Colonel Benjamin Adekule, the Black Scorpion, is replaced by Colonel Olusegun Obasanjo. With great rejuvenation, the Nigerian army was now on its way to crush the Biafran Rebellion forever. That same month, a Swedish national by the name of Carl Gustav von Rosen took it upon himself to re-establish the Biafran Air Force almost single-handedly. He led several Biafran airstrikes against some notable federal targets. This function, codenamed Operation Biafran Babies, saw von Rosen and his compatriots performing improvised squadron attacks against installations and airfields in Port Harcourt, Benin, and Enugu. the Nigerians were severely rattled by the attack, which led to the destruction of several of their Russian-built aircraft and various oil and power installations in the Midwest. These attacks continued in the autumn, but inevitably became unsuccessful in neutralizing the ability of the Nigerian Air Force to operate. The recapture of Owerri by the Biafran forces was quickly followed by a deep southward thrust towards Port Harcourt. The Biafrans continued to occupy the countryside between and behind the federal positions. Colonel Obasanjo spent his initial 6 weeks of his command containing a Biafran advance at Haba. Initially, his objective was first to retake Owerri and then proceed to take Oguta before finally moving towards the all-important Uli Airport, which was the safe haven of the Biafran resistance. However, by November 1969, the Nigerian reconnaissance probe had begun to reveal gaps in the Biafran defenses. This convinced Colonel Obasanjo that a better option would be to mount an advance on a broad front towards Umuahia to link up with the 1st Division, effectively cutting what remained of Biafra in half, before then turning west and advancing on Uli, by which point it could safely be surmised that the Biafran resistance would crumble. On the 22nd of December 1969, the 3rd Marine Commando Division attempted to link up with the 1st Division in Umuahia. They reached the city on Christmas Day, resulting in the dissection of the all-important food-producing region of Arochukwu in the east. Without pausing to break their stride, Colonel Obasanjo and his men moved west towards Uli. The final battle between Nigeria and Biafra was about to take place. On the 7th of January 1970, Colonel Obasanjo's 3rd Marine Commando Division, supported by the 1st and the 2nd Divisions, launched the final offensive codenamed Operation Tailwind against the remaining Biafran enclave. In less than a day of fighting, the Biafrans were forced to surrender. While the Nigerian attacks continued, the Biafran leaders were having their final meeting. General Ojukwu announced his plans of traveling abroad in search of peace and handed over the Biafran presidency to his vice president, Philip Effiong. On the 9th of January 1970, Ojukwu boarded a private jet and fled to the Ivory Coast. 2 days later, the Nigerians took control of Arochukwu and the Uli Airport. And so, the final enclave of Biafra, the land of the rising sun, had been successfully captured. The next day, the new Biafran president and his prominent officers called for a ceasefire and made their way to Owerri to broadcast their final surrender to Colonel Obasanjo. After a few moments of cordial conversation, Colonel Obasanjo accepted the offer for a surrender from the Biafrans. On the 15th of January 1970, Effiong flew to Lagos to officially announce the surrender, and the Republic of Biafra ceased to exist.
I, Major General Philip Effiong, officer administering the government of the Republic of Biafra, now wish to make the following declaration. That we affirm we are loyal Nigerian citizens and accept that the Republic of Biafra hereby ceases to exist.
The tragic chapter of violence is just ended. We are at the dawn of national reconciliation. Once again, we have an opportunity to build a new nation. You will have heard that my government may seek the assistance of friendly foreign governments and bodies, especially in the provision of equipment to supplement our national effort. There are, however, a number of foreign governments and organizations whose so-called assistance will not be welcome. These are the governments and organizations which sustained the rebellion. They are thus guilty of the blood of thousands who perished because of the prolongation of the futile rebel resistance. They did not act out of love for humanity. Their purpose was to disintegrate Nigeria and Africa and impose their will on us.
The Nigerian Civil War resulted in an upwards of over 100,000 military casualties and anywhere between 1 to 2 million Biafran civilians who died in one way or another as a consequence of the war. The later figure varies widely, but what is inescapable is that a colossal price of human life and suffering was paid in pursuit of national unity that remains as ill-defined today as it was then. Despite the rapid reintegration of the country and the concerted efforts on the part of Nigerians to put the past behind them, the question of unity would continue to plague the Nigerian political rhetoric as the years proceed. These tensions were overshadowed by the fact that the military remained in power after the war. Committed to unity and order, the military government was by no means democratic, becoming corrupt in every bit as the First Republic had been. As Commander-in-Chief of the Nigerian Armed Forces, General Yakubu Gowon went on to rule Nigeria for another 5 years, becoming the longest-serving head of state and ruling the country for almost 9 years until he was overthrown by the former commanding officer of the 2nd Division, Brigadier Murtala Mohammed. After 13 years in exile, Ojukwu was pardoned by the then Nigerian President Shehu Shagari and allowed to return to the country as a private citizen. He continued to take part in active politics until the 26th of November 2011 when he died of a brief illness in the United Kingdom at the age of 78. He was accorded the highest military accolade by the Nigerian Army during his funeral. It is now over 50 years after the war, but the question of Nigerian unity still hangs in the balance. If you've watched this video to the end, I want to say thank you and you are amazing. If you love my work and want to support it, consider following me on Patreon. The link is in the description below. All the money goes back into the channel, enabling me to continuously tell the story of Africa clearly and concisely. There are also rewards and special offers exclusive to our patrons. And do not forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell notification to never miss any of our videos when it drops. You can also watch the entire Nigerian history playlist at the end of the video. I will leave you with some before and after photos of some of the kingpins during the war. I love you all, and until I see you in the next video, goodbye.